I would like to talk about the dangers of online reputation scores. Because in a lot of ways, there's some similarities with social credit scores. Even though online reputation scores may be developed by corporations, or maybe even by Web 3.0 developers who are trying to disrupt corporations, there's still some risks that we need to be cognizant of, given that this is probably an inevitable part of our future. First, what do I even mean by an online reputation score? And you can think of this as something like Reddit has karma, where the longer you spend on Reddit, the more you post without being flagged as a bot or flagged as a troll. Your credit goes up, your karma goes up on that website. And it's used to sort of manage the space, to keep it a little bit safer, so that the managers of Reddit kind of know if there's someone who's being a problem. Is it someone who's just a new account that was just created, or an old account that maybe deserves a little more attention before stifling what they're saying? But of course, there can be all kinds of online reputation scores. There could be scores that determine, do you follow through with what you say you're going to do? In fact, eBay has a version of that sort of makes you trust sellers who have a long history of sending the product they say they're going to send in the condition they say the product is. And eBay would probably not even be possible without that kind of online reputation score. So I think to make the online environment work in the future, there will have to be some version of these scores. And of course, corporations could issue these scores in a non-transparent way, where they're using the scores behind the scenes, not telling you that you even have such a score. So basically, I think this is inevitable. I'll do a different video on the case in favor of online reputation scores, but this video is about the risks. Risk number one is that these scores could be used in a manipulative way on behalf of huge powers. And by huge powers, I could mean large corporations, I could mean governments, I could mean collusion within industries or across industries. And this risk is actually very analogous to the problems people have with social credit score systems for governments. And that is, it's basically getting the government to use rejection by your peers and evaluation by your peers to enforce government desires. So the government may not want you to criticize the government, but it builds other useful things into this credit score, like, do you show up? Do you pay your bills on time? Do you treat people with respect in online spaces or in-person spaces? They can build whatever they want to into that score. And I've even heard that in some countries, the issued social credit score is on people's dating profiles, so that your peers you're trying to date might reject you if you have a low score, even if that low score is because you just criticized the government. You have great scores in all of those other areas, but the fact that it's sort of meshed together with all these other scores means you can control people's behavior regarding criticizing the government by clumping together the score with things the government is trying to enforce. So it creates this huge social enforcement that has a lot of power potentially. And the question is, would corporations use the score in the same way that an authoritarian government might? Like, what would corporations even use that score for? And when I try to think that through, what comes to mind is they might use the score to try to dissuade people from unionizing, or dissuade people from voting for a candidate who is going to do things against the corporation's self-interest. So I do think corporations could use credit scores or online reputation scores in a way that's actually somewhat analogous to authoritarian governments. Now, my second worry with online reputation scores is that they could do a really good job of channeling power and opportunity to people who already have privilege. And here's an example of that. Let's say that in the future, there's some online system that matches people up with charities or meetup groups or whatever, and they decide to develop an online reputation score that just says, do you show up on time or not? Like, I could imagine that being a really useful score. It could incentivize good behavior in addition to identifying people who are likely to be contributing members of any community. The problem here is, could there be a correlation between socioeconomic status and this particular behavior? Like people who are low income, oftentimes they're juggling kids and jobs and they're just juggling a lot. And maybe it's harder for them to show up on time on average. So if that score captures something in a correlational format, the question is, what percentage of that correlation is just a good correlation with socioeconomic status versus a correlation with the behavior you want, but also perhaps the traits you want in a group member, such as being consistent and committing to things. If there is that correlation, then this score could open up more opportunity to people who already have it. Like, it could be that the habit of showing up on time is something that's trained in kids who go to private schools or who go to fancy colleges, that's just sort of socially enforced in those groups in a way that makes those groups more likely to do well on the score. And of course, I'm really worried about weird data being put into these algorithms, such as just what sorts of things do you watch online? And if you happen to watch some kind of content that a lot of low-income people watch, then that could be negatively correlated with do you pay your bills on time? Do you show up on time? Do you follow through? Because, of course, low-income people have a lot more trouble paying their bills on time. So you could be docked for just doing things that low-income people do. If there's going to be some kind of reputation score that correlates weird things with some behavior that they're trying to incentivize or trying to identify people who are good at that behavior. So that's my second worry. And then my third worry is related to this. These systems could end up sort of incentivizing behaviors that are not really rational to incentivize, and it's not like there's any person who's trying to incentivize that. But if people notice that, oh, if you watch that one person on YouTube, your score seems to go down, so you shouldn't watch that one person because a lot of low-income people watch them, then it could incentivize people to just take up behaviors that are more common among higher socioeconomic status or higher education status people. And that could really disadvantage low-income communities if their behaviors end up being stigmatized sort of in a second-hand kind of way. And that gets at my next worry, which is that these reputation scores could create a whole bunch more dimensions to stigmatize people. Like, if you have 15 different reputation scores from different websites in different realms, people could use that to reject you in many different ways or to sort of look down on you based on some measure that someone came up with, which is probably a crude measure of who you are as a person and what you have to offer. And that relates to my next worry, which is that it could promote evaluating people in a non-holistic way. Like, instead of really getting to know someone's personality, their character, the nuances of the strengths and weaknesses of every person, it just sort of promotes, okay, they have this score, I can dismiss them or I can put them in this box and no longer really invest energy evaluating the kind of person that they are. And I think that's one of the healthy things about communities is that you really get to know people in a holistic way. If you get to see that person every week and you get to see them deal with different problems and interact with different people, you develop a nuanced understanding of how they tick. And if we eliminate the need to develop that nuanced view of people by just codifying their character into 15 different metrics, I think that just eliminates some of the health of human relationships and human communities. And then the last worry I have is that some traits that could be negative in many people's views and codified as negative actually have a positive side to that character trait that you wouldn't want to squelch. And these scores might not fully account for that. So here's my example of this. I could imagine a score that's sort of a bully score. Like, are you a bully in online spaces? And I can even imagine why that would be useful in the online space. For example, maybe there's a subset of a certain social media firm where if you move into that subset of the social media, this is a space for support and non-bullying and non-trolling and authentic conversation. And I could see people going back and forth between that subset and the larger subset, depending on their mood or how sensitive they're feeling. Like maybe they're just in a really sensitive mood or just dealt with something difficult, so they want to go into that space where there's no bullies allowed. So I can totally see the use for a reputation score like that. The problem here is that bully behavior could be correlated with standing up to people who are being mean. Like, it could even be correlated with anti-bullying, because telling someone that they're being a jerk, that could be interpreted as bullying them. Oh, you're actually telling them they're a jerk and you're making that person feel bad for being a jerk. But sometimes people just need to be told they're a jerk. So speaking truth to people could be interpreted as bullying, experienced as bullying. And if we try to give someone a low score for saying things offensive or hurtful to people, you might actually weed out all of the people who are capable of standing up to bad behavior. So it's this idea that there's almost always two sides to a coin with character traits. There's times when people like that are not good to have around, and other times when people with that character trait might be more correlated with a character trait you want. Like, someone who's really organized can also be kind of pedantic and rule-oriented. That's a positive and a negative version of the same character trait. Someone who's really sociable might not be good at staying on task at work. That's a character trait that has a positive and a negative. And so many traits that we could codify in a reputation score do have positive and negative versions, such that if we tried to flatten it to a single score, that score might not actually be as useful as we had originally intended. So I'm sure there's more worries with these scores than I've articulated here, but I just wanted to get out a few thoughts about reputation scores.